So this is a little bit of a something, little bit of a something. It's a little bit of something that I have wanted to do for a couple days, weeks. I don't know how time passes. It's been on my mind recently, considering the fact that I haven't really done any of these kind of solo podcasts in quite a while. I used to do them pretty frequently, but kind of fell by the wayside. But specifically with this, I just want to take an opportunity to talk more broadly, both about myself, but about like things in general pertaining to the process of just creativity. I don't. I guess I was gonna say I don't know who this is for. I guess for artists or people interested in it, or people interested in me, maybe. Uh, if that's a thing. But like, I always feel kind of awkward just talking about myself in an explicit sense. Feels like overly self-indulgent, but I do like to do it as most people do. And I kind of want to talk about my sort of thought process and what I'm doing creatively because especially recently, I feel like it's not so clear. But I like having it out there that like I am, trying to work on projects and work on things and talk about the issues that I grapple with and that such. It's something that's interesting and I want to talk about it. And I think maybe it might even help me be a little bit more motivated to keep working on projects because a lot of stuff is pretty difficult. So to sort of set the stage for that, I want to talk a little bit about how I got into making things in the first place. I think that, establishes a bit of a common ground, because like I've been primarily interested in doing creatively charged things as a profession for about as long as I can physically remember. Since I knew that since I had the conception of there being a job, that was really what I was most interested in. And I'd say the origins of it probably go back to sometime when I was maybe around like 5 or 6 years old or something like that. I struggle with exact dates when it comes to stuff like that because I just don't really remember. But one of the first things that I remember being really really excited about was we would get the Sunday paper. Remember that? Most people probably don't. But my family was like a step behind the times. We held on to like VHS cassettes like well after like everybody else I knew. All my other friends had DVD players and everything. But that's totally unrelated. And so we would get the Sunday paper, and I remember just poring over the comics page again and again and again. I would read it countless times. I actually would snip out like individual like comics like that I liked and glue them into a book because I was trying to get them all collected together. And I remember my uncle gave me and my sister some of his old Calvin and Hobbes books, and yet again, that was another thing we would read over and over and over again. I remember at my grandparents' house, they had like a little cabinet with books inside of it, and there was a Heathcliff collection, like a small booklet with a collection of Heathcliff comics, and a small booklet with a collection of Andy Cooper. I believe that's the name, Andy Cooper. It's pretty interesting comic to read from a modern perspective, since it's very much like a comic that's supposed to be for everyone. But the main joke of the comic is that the main guy is a deadbeat who is literally constantly drunk and wastes all like the money that his wife earns. He doesn't even have a job. I just remembered. He's just always lying on the couch doing nothing, and she's trying to get him to work. Like it's just about him being drunk and useless. Fun for the whole family. Words to live by. But yeah, so I would read that every single time we would go to visit my grandparents, which was pretty frequently, and I just all of those things got really ingrained in my psyche, and I was drawing from a pretty young age and had that interest in my mind. Like, I basically, for as long as I can remember, I've been like doodling and sketching and just drawing whatever. Just because it's something that, I mean, it's pretty normal for children to draw. You give them a pencil and some paper and they just, scribble. And that scribbling sort of never went away. It was always something that if I was feeling, bored or didn't know what to do, it was very easy to sit down and just like let my hands flow over a piece of paper, and make goofy looking characters and stuff like that. So when I found these comics, when I was reading Calvin and Hobbes and all these other things, and I remember the Calvin and Hobbes books would have like forewords and like occasional pages that would be like added like notations from Bill Watterson, talking about certain things pertaining to the strip, sometimes like a little bit of a background detail or something else. And so basically, as soon as I knew that like making comics was something that people could do as a profession, that was like my first ideal, my first goal. I remember I would just always be making comics. A lot of them, actually, still have a decent amount because I held on to a lot of the drawings that I did as a kid, which I'm thankful for now because it's pretty fun to look back on. A lot of them I don't even understand what the punchlines are anymore. A child's sense of humor is a very unique thing, very very unique. Excluding the obvious like slapstick humor, there's a lot of comics that have just the ending doesn't make any sense to me anymore. I'm sure it was hilarious when I was 8 years old. There was like one specific series of strips that I would do in tandem with a friend I had at the time that was called John Eddie. John Eddie. He has two first names as a first and last name. I don't even remember. Actually, I don't remember if it was first and last name or that was his whole first name. I think it might have been the latter. And that one was very much so directly inspired by Calvin and Hobbes. He even had like the striped shirt. Though I'm going to describe this. If I can be bothered to, actually, I'll put a picture on screen. But the design is still like ingrained in my memory. He had two, like regular black dot eyes, and then over one eye was this big circle. I don't know what it was. It just was a thing he had. Just had a big circle around one of the eyes. He was completely bald with a spherical head, except for 3 prongs of like just straight lines of hair sticking out of his head. Then he had a red striped shirt like Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes, and just normal jeans, and just circles for feet, and of course 4 fingers as always. That's a necessity. And the general premise of the comic was always that he was kind of just an idiot, a stupid kid, and very sort of oblivious, but a bit of a mischief maker. So yeah, Calvin and Hobbes. So that was kind of like for a long time what I was really interested in. I even remember like going on this website. I can't even remember the name, but I remember it had like a ton of like comics and stuff on it. Among the various websites I visited, like Poptropica and all those, that I would read through a bunch of stuff on. I'll have to probe my memory a bit more to recall that. but so comics were kind of like the initial interest, and then obviously from that developed an interest in animation because I loved watching animated shows as a kid. That was always what I was like most interested in, and it's an interest that never really waned. I never shifted from being excited about animation to being all in on live action. Even before I got into anime, I was still like when I was in my later teens. I still mostly watched animated shows, and animated movies and such. And finding anime was more so like just a second rabbit hole because I realized that there was all this animated entertainment that covered a much more diverse range of styles and age and gender demographics than I was used to with a lot of Western animation, because of differences in how it is produced and stuff such. So that sort of defines, like, I guess the arc of my creativity when it comes to illustration. And I guess I'll go from there. I can cover other territories in later videos and such, but I guess I'll focus on that. With the process of doing art and drawing and such, it's something that I have been doing for a long time, but I wouldn't really say that I'm particularly good at it in any way. I mean, I post my art every once in a while, and I'm sure you can ascertain as much of pertaining to my skill level and such just from what I've posted. Like you wouldn't really think that I've been drawing since I was 4, based on that, but it comes with something that I guess people should be really aware of if they're like actively trying to improve at something, and that's that there's a difference between doing something and practicing it in the sense that you're improving, and for the most part, in the time span that I've been drawing, I have just been doing it. I never really liked, as a kid, I always hated drawing photoreal anything. I hated drawing from reference because for me the fun of it was being able to just make things up from my imagination and put them on paper. That was what I liked about drawing. It was that like pure just creative energy. So I was doing that literally all the time because it was just something I would do when I was bored. I wasn't really like focused on anything in particular. It wasn't until I started getting older that like the conception of like actually getting good at this skill as like with a concerted effort became something that I even considered. And when you're just at a piece of paper and you're just drawing and you're not looking at a reference or anything like that, you're pretty much gonna just go in a straight line in terms of skill, which is sort of what happened to me. Which is rather frustrating. I even remember as a kid, there were times when I would try to do, because I would say I'm pretty competent when it comes to doing the stereotypical, like Sunday comic, super spherical, goofy looking cartoon character style like that. I think I can execute because that's mostly what I referenced when I was initially developing like my style and stuff as a kid. And when I was younger, I would try occasionally to do these more detailed or more realistic styles, like more manga-esque or more comic book-esque styles. And I would always get really frustrated because that was when I couldn't execute on what I had in my head. I could never realize it. I was never satisfied with the end result, and so I would just give up. I would just stop. I started working on a comic that was more in that style. I wasn't liking the style. I didn't finish it, and that's that was a pretty consistent trend with me just giving up when hitting a roadblock, which is another thing that you kind of need to go push through the roadblocks, and that's how you actually challenge yourself and improve. So it's making that concerted effort and continue to challenge yourself. Nowadays, I do want to get better at drawing and doing illustration and all this kind of stuff. But my kind of issue just comes from time management, for a bit time management, a bit motivation, which I'll probably touch on because that's like an entire subject unto itself. But when it comes to the practice of drawing, I still see it largely as a therapeutic process. It's something I tend to go to doing when I'm feeling down or just in a weird mood or don't know what to do. I just want to, listen to some music and totally zone out and just let my hands flow and create something from my imagination. That's when I want to draw. I guess because it's been sort of a comforting practice for me for a really long time. And because of that, I'm not really practicing super often. And even when I do practice, it's a kind of one of my issues I have is I tend to get really excited about one particular discipline of art and practice it super frequently every day. And then I fall off of it after a couple weeks and don't touch it for a while. And that makes it hard to make a lot of improvement because I'm constantly stopping and starting. It's not super conducive to growth. I do want to talk a little bit about because I mentioned like not finishing things, and I've done that a lot with doing comics. There's a lot of comics like I've started and then never finished from when I was younger and even when I was getting older. I remember I tried to start doing a web comic, which was the period when I was reading a lot of web comics. There was a point in time I was really into Nendroid and Sandra and Wu. That was another one I really liked. Back, just by the same author as Nendroid. There's probably some others. I recall liking Yumi Cells. I can't remember anything else immediately off the top of my head, but those were some of the ones that I enjoyed reading. And so I was getting, I wanted to start doing it myself. But there's a couple things. One, I realized that I'm not very good at doing the conventional 4-panel gag strip. I find it like really restrictive and it just doesn't work for me a lot of the time. I just don't think most of the things I think of fit, especially when I was younger. I think now I have a much more defined approach to humor. I know I've practiced it. I would say it's weird to say you practice humor, but it's something that I have like tried to improve at and push myself to be better at. And I think I have a much better sense for what kind of comedy I would want to create and go for, which tends to be a more an almost kind of anti-comedy is mostly what I like doing myself, in the sense that it's a total it's a mix of this sense of like surrealism and insanity with mundanity, like a total lack of response or care or interest in the surrealist things going on. It's like this total sense of apathy, or not even apathy, but total normalcy to this insanity that is being presented. Say you have this character and they come in, they see something that seems to defy all strokes of logic, and then they ask it like they just say, the weather's nice, isn't it? That kind of, it's not really a laugh out loud kind of humor, but it embodies a very specific tone to comedy that I really like and I like recreating. So that's mostly what I go for nowadays. But back then I was trying to do comedy that followed what I was like seeing more so, and I just wasn't super. It wasn't something that I was used to thinking up. Like I just couldn't come up with a lot of ideas, so a lot of those projects didn't really go anywhere. And then the next comic that I did was one that I did with a friend, with Kobe, a couple years back, because I wanted to sort of get back in the practice of working on a project like that. And I figured, I'm not super motivated, and also I'm kind of bad at coming up with stories. In the sense that I think I'm a pretty competent writer, but I struggle a bit with that, like that, getting over that initial barrier of brainstorming, like getting a good idea is the hardest part for me, I think, when it comes to writing things. Like, because I love writing character dialogue and stuff like that. That's always super enjoyable for me. But getting the actual like story structure is something that I find more challenging and also not super fun. I mostly just like writing character interactions. But that's not gonna make an entire story, right? So I was like, well, why don't I get away this part of the process that's the most difficult and like sort of impeding me from doing stuff, and also turn it into a collaborative venture, because I just like working on collaborative projects. I find them super super fun and motivating, and they just generally are really satisfying to do. And I think the fact that, for me at least, when I do a collaborative project, the fact that someone else is relying on me is a big push to actually, get stuff done. When you're beholden only to yourself, then you can go easier on yourself. You can be like, well, I mean, I'm the only person I'm going to let down is myself. It's pretty easy to make excuses and let things fly. But if it's someone else, well, at least for me personally, like I care a lot about not letting someone's expectations down, living up, and I just like to be someone who is faithful to my word, to what I say. And so that makes me more motivated to do things. So I have my friend doing the story for the comic. He came up with this whole idea. It was like a comedy about this girl who is a magical girl on a show for kids. She's a sort of like a snide, hates her job kind of character, and she encounters all these sort of absurd personalities in the process of doing her job. Maho Shoujoji. What is that? What it was called? No. Sorry. I said not the thing that was in my head, but a different thing that was from like a previous conversation the other day. We were talking about Maho Shoujoji, and that's why it was in my mind. That's totally unrelated. Magical Girl Degenerate is the name of the comic. So I was doing that, and I was having fun with it. I just like my friend's writing style. I like his sense of humor, and it's not something that I could really do myself. He's got a very unique brand of humor, I think. But he was pretty slow with writing the chapters. Kobe, this particular friend, he's not the fastest with any kind of like creative stuff. So Maybe not the best person to rely on to pressure me to be more consistent with my work. So I think there were only like 3 chapters, I'm pretty sure. I can actually look it up now. I'm pretty sure it's still up on Tapas. Is that how it's spelled? Tapas? I don't know. But like I had been doing that because I was finding it fun, and I thought it was a good way to okay. It was in 2019. There were 3 chapters, and the gap between them was pretty wide. Because the first chapter came out in July, the next one in November, the one after that in January 2020. There was like at least a 2-month gap between chapters, and the chapters themselves were done. They're structured in like manga page format, and they were longer. Like they had like a decent number of pages per chapter. Like I was trying to create like a more proper comic experience, and I did have fun doing it. It was like a good time, and I kind of want to do a more developing narrative comic again in this manner. And I'll continue talking, but yeah. So this was a good project, a good learning project, but obviously like it didn't end up really panning out, and so that came to a stop. And following that, there was nothing for a really long time, basically a whole year. In the year of 2020, I didn't really do any comics. I think I did a couple. I'm pretty sure I did a couple like short. I don't even think I did any of that. I know I posted some illustrations, but I don't think I did any comics in 2020. And then finally in January, the new year, I was, and this happens every new year. I think for a lot of people, it's like the new year's coming. You're like, okay, I get. It's like a fresh start. It's the same thing with like a beginning of a new day or beginning of a new week. Every beginning, I feel like is a good like jumping point to try and be more productive and get more done. Obviously, rarely pans out to the height of your expectations, but it's still a good practice. And in that January, I was thinking about how like I really wanted to tell a story. And this is something that I like. I've always thought is I tend to get stuck. Like I have this desire to tell these stories or tell stories in general. Like there are some stories I already have in like my brain floating around. Then just the general feeling of wanting to create narrative art. But I get stuck at this phase of like doubting my ideas or just not believing I'm capable of pulling off what I want, and I don't end up going through with it a lot of the time for that reason. We could talk about writing at a different time. I've got so many unfinished books. That's like a huge, a pretty decently sized rabbit hole of its own. So I tend to get stuck, and I feel like not confident in the work I'm doing, so I don't want to put it out there. But I also don't really like, with the exception of music, and even then, I don't like the fact that I'm not sharing it. It's just that I will continue to do it anyways. I really don't like making things that I don't share. But I do it decently often just because there's also that gap of like not being confident in your work and feeling like it's not worth posting. And then that's a whole other territory because this is like an entirely different tangent, but I guess I'll follow it. Is like finding the line between like sharing, like being willing to share your work even if like you feel weird about doing it, because that's the way that you sort of improve and get an audience and everything. Like, it's just good to put your stuff out there, I think. And then also not like trying to have still have a standard of quality without not ever posting anything. Like finding that line, because I don't want to be someone who's like actively putting out work that I think is bad. And just like my contribution to the world of art is just things that are not good. Like I do want to be trying, but still like forcing yourself to put things out there, I think is ultimately like good. So going back to the previous subject, I wanted to do something different, just get something out there. And this was kind of similar to something I'd done before, where I made a EP album in a week, like just as a challenge to myself, and just to do something and get it out there, because I felt like I wasn't really doing enough. I kept getting stuck in this phase of not really working on anything because I'm just feeling not confident in doing anything. So I was like, okay, in January, I'm going to make a comic. I'm going to post a strip every day. I think this came, actually, I'm pretty sure leading up to this, I had done a couple short, like 4-panel kind of things, if I remember right. But I feel like there was something I'd done that had given me a bit of confidence in doing it. And so I started working on this to do, like on the idea and everything, and plotting out this overarching like story to things. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to stop trying to be, the most original person in the world, the most, unique. I'm just going to take all the things that I like and put them in a story. So you have an androgynous protagonist that's speechless. You have this sort of vaguely like towny post-apocalyptic question mark, dystopian kind of strange universe or setting. This isn't expanded on as much because I didn't end up making follow-ups to the first comic, which would have showed that more if I had done them. But it has like this sort of sketchy pencil style, which I did specifically because I thought that would be a lot easier to pull off, and it would look better than if I tried to go for something more detailed or more refined, like I did with Magical Girl Degenerate, which I think is overall, took me more time, overall to create in the time trade-off because I was doing a lot more. But generally speaking, I think Kotori just aesthetically looks better. It's much more consistent. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that I do think I have improved as an artist in the span of the time between those two. But just in general, I think it overall was a much wiser decision, especially considering that I was doing it as a daily project. And so honestly, doing that comic and seeing it through to completion, because I did miss some days. I missed a couple days, but I caught up. I ultimately released a comic for every day that there was in the month, and I told a complete story. Obviously, I designed the character and the setting with the idea that I could revisit this at a later date if I wanted to. It's a very like open to having more installments in it because of the way that it's set up. But even though looking back on it now, I don't really think Kotori, at least this installment, this chapter, this Twitter comic, I don't really like it that much. Like, from a, separated point of view, I think overall it's pretty bad. There's a lot of inconsistencies with the art. There's a lot of really obvious mistakes. I probably shouldn't say this because you'll notice, and I meant to go through and correct it because I was going to give it a proper post on Tapas or something, or Webtoon or something like that, so that it would be archived in a more sort of permanent way, which I might do eventually, but I still haven't gotten around to it, so God knows at this point, right? I was going to fix it then, but yeah, like something I didn't notice but ended up happening is Kotori has like a little bag, and if you pay attention, the bag constantly between panels and between individual strips constantly switches sides. It's always switching side because I would just forget which side it was when I was drawing her from a different angle or perspective. And it was a really common but very obvious and like stupid sort of mistake. Like another issue besides like general art inconsistencies and stuff is like I think like the climax just doesn't sell the emotions very well. I was trying to do like a more like my weaknesses as an artist really show in the climax, I think, where I was trying to go for more because trying to realize those emotions just didn't play out in quite the way I wanted. The pacing is kind of wonky because it starts with like absolutely no dialogue, very slow paced, and then suddenly the plot kicks in and everything is blazing through because I realized I was like, oh shit, I have to get through this entire plot I have planned out in the time that I have left. Ideally it would have been, you know, maybe twice as long to tell the story but I had to do a lot of expositing and really blaze through things once I introduced the character that could actually speak into the story. And I still have a fondness. I really like the characters that I have, the two primary characters. I'm quite fond of them. Oh, another thing I want to complain of. I'm just complaining about. It's weird because a lot of the time I'm very insecure about my work, and I feel like criticism is like it can feel devastating. But in a weird way, I have a really strong attachment to this particular project, and I feel like it's because it is something that I really saw through to completion and did give it an honest, like my honest full effort. It's like I feel this pride over it, even as I can like happily point out all the issues, because it is also, the story is quite literally a unrealizing ripoff of the backstory for Kino from Kino's Journey. I hadn't seen the show in years. I guess it was just lodged in my subconscious because there's a lot of parallels. It's not exactly the same, but there's an awful lot of parallels between them in ways that I just didn't realize, and I would have made a more concerted effort to distinguish if I had known, because it is worse than that story. So it's just having a worse version of a different story is not ideal if you're gonna do something. If it's very much your own thing, then at least it's the only way you'll get that, even if it's not perfect. Compared to just trying to replicate something else. If you're doing it worse, then why would you consume that over something else? Even with all those problems, like I said, I'm still happy I did it, and like I feel like a sense of pride and fondness over the memory of it. Though that said, I look back on it happily now. That month was so stressful. That's for a variety of reasons, though. I was really pushing myself a little too hard because I was doing this daily comic on Twitter. Each comic was like 4 panels, black and white, with this pencil style. So it wasn't the most difficult. The point is that it would take me several hours out of my day to work on this, and that would vary obviously depending on the complexity of the panels and stuff. And if I was behind and needed to do other ones to catch up. While I was doing that, I was also trying to revitalize my YouTube channel by uploading weekly videos. This failed horribly, but I was doing that. I was uploading weekly while also working on this comic alongside, my life and work and stuff, because also, huge shock, having a YouTube channel with 15,000 subscribers doesn't exactly pay the bills. I was doing all that simultaneously, and that was a little bit much. Maybe next time I would do the comic without the YouTube videos without the comic, one or the other. Gotta pick your battles a little bit, but in spite of that, I still feel a joy over it. And so that's kind of something that I've been thinking of doing again, something like that, especially because I think comics are a really good form for expression, especially for someone like myself, who I think is not like super. I don't have a really high level of technical skill, but I do think I have, a decent level of creativity and imagination, and like I think I can create. I think I am capable of creating a story or characters that will interest people and get people invested. I think it's something that I am capable of doing. Drawing a gorgeous masterpiece work of art on the level of the kind of stuff I retweet constantly on my Twitter, not something I'm currently capable of. Would be nice to be capable of in the future, but I don't know if I have the level of dedication to hone my craft to get to that level, right? So this is something, and I feel like people are more open to weaker art when it comes packaged in a comic. Even a lot of the most famous webcomics have honestly pretty ugly art. They're just sort of a transportation box for the gags and the story, and the illustration aspect is more playing second fiddle to that. So it's a way that I could utilize like visual storytelling and stuff like that, which is something I really like, but in a way that people are more willing to engage with. Because I even noticed, like, occasionally I'll post like some art that I do, and occasionally I'll post more recently actually I've been trying to push myself to make some of those comics with like the sort of absurdist sense of humor I was talking about, and post those. And comparing the engagement that I get on the single illustrations and on the comics, it's like night and day. Even in cases where, I think it was like a better drawing than the drawings I did in the comic, like the comics always get way, way more engagement, and much more likely to get like stuff like retweets and stuff, which is good if you're trying to expand your audience. I think that's just the fact that packaging a story immediately adds a second layer of engagement. When you have to stop and like actually think for a second about what you're looking at, then you're way more likely to come away with some sort of emotional feelings about it. Whereas if it's just a single image, it's really easy to just scroll right by and not even have it register in your brain unless it is something super, exceptional or very horny, like very horny. That's also a big department of Twitter art. Like I said, my like sort of one of the first things that I liked doing or wanted to do was comics, so it's something that I have a strong attachment to. But I'm not the best at doing just these one-off comics. I keep trying to force myself to do it just because I think it's a good practice. It's a good practice. It's good practice also. Just generally trying to come up with unique sort of concepts and stuff and realize them. But what I want to do more than that is to tell, a more overarching story. So I've been kicking around in my mind the idea of doing something like that again. There's a couple other projects that I have in mind that I'll probably talk about if I do more episodes of this podcasty thing. And this is a pretty recent thing that's been in my brain, I guess, because it's been a hot minute, since almost a full year since I did that comic in January, right? That it's like I'm getting that itch again. It's that time of the year, isn't it? And I want to, up myself. I want to do something better than I did last time. Maybe slightly more planned out, all things considered. So that's just been something in my brain recently that I sort of thought might be fun to talk about. I've been no promises. Don't take this as anything at all. Like, pretend I didn't even say it. I have been kind of thinking of trying to do something in the spirit of the season, Halloween, fall kind of themed comic. Though I don't know if I'll end up doing that because Halloween's coming pretty rapidly at the end of the month. So I would have to get started on it pretty soon if I do want to do it. That would just be like a shorter story. Whereas what I've been thinking of, like, that I want to do is a more not long form necessarily, because I like the idea of telling like complete stories, even in the sense of like Kotori. Like I said, it's a complete story, but it could, have multiple iterations and develop this other secondary narrative of like the mystery surrounding like what Kotori is and why they're on their quest from town to town. Because I don't like those kind of comics that just go on forever and ever and ever. I hate them so much. It's such a bother. And it's so hard to stay invested in a story when it just never ends. At least for me personally. Comics tend to come out pretty slowly because they're usually done by only one person. So it's like you're getting like one page every like couple days, or maybe a couple pages a week. It's like just not the most conducive. So I prefer when it's like you get this comfortably sized story and you can just, blaze through the whole thing in like a couple hours and just like let that story soak in and into your memory and everything and appreciate it. So something of that kind of length. Personally, and this is another thing, like personally I also prefer experiencing stories all at once, including comics, anime, everything. I don't really enjoy the medium of consuming things week by week. It's not something I'm a super big fan of. I find that it personally taints the experience because if I'm going to experience a story, I like to be fully invested in that story's world from start to finish. Whereas if you're doing it week by week, you're constantly being yanked out of the story's world. And then you have to put yourself back in that story's world. And it tends to hurt. It doesn't ruin things for me, obviously. I've watched shows weekly and read comics weekly, but I do think it hurts the experience overall for me. And so I personally am not the biggest fan of it. But, just moving to my chair a little bit, but if I were to do a comic, another one, I would probably release it in that fashion as well. Because it just makes a lot more sense from pretty much every perspective. Because the problem with releasing something all at once is like you only have so many chances to get some eyes on your project, to get people to look at your thing and talk about your thing. So you make this entire comic, you post it, people are like, oh, that was a pretty good comic, and then they give you the retweet and the like and the, ooh, you did good job, nice one, mate. And then that's it, your comic's done. Unless you keep tweeting about it, no one is going to talk about it anymore, because the project is dead as far as the internet is concerned. That's the end of that. Go make the next thing, buddy. Whereas if you are posting, say, the whole thing one page at a time on Twitter, not only are you still going to get those retweets and that engagement, you're going to get it over a longer span of time, which means that the number of people that could potentially see and be drawn to your project is infinitely wider and larger. And people are not even going to be less, I don't even think people will be less inclined to share it. Maybe there's a slight increase in people who want to like really retweet and share and push something when it's over, because it's like a big sign. But I actually feel like that might be less the case, because people like being involved with something as it is happening, as it is like in the process, that you get this sense as a viewer, as an audience member, that you are a part of it. You're a part of this community of all these people who are fans, and that's like that sort of emotional attachment to the act of following a project is, I think, much more conducive to getting an audience that is like trying to share and support you. So it just seems to be objectively the best method of putting your work out there, unless you happen to have like a book deal or something, which is rather unlikely. So if I were to do like another decently long comic, I would probably go with that method, where I would release it on Twitter like one page at a time, and then have like a website or something where you could read through the backlog and such. But yeah, so that's kind of the stuff. There's so much stuff that I could talk about, but I think that's like a good stopping point. I'm sorry if I was like all over the place and didn't say anything of substance or value whatsoever, but then maybe you just had a podcast to put on in the background while you played Fortnite, so you're welcome, I hope. I just like, I wanted to do something in this vein again, because it is fun to do. So, yeah. Thank you for listening. If you happen to listen to this whole thing, I appreciate you. And also, before you go, please let me know in the comments what you would like me to talk about in future installments of this. I'm thinking like I want to talk about all range, just like talk about different kinds of like creative fields and stuff, from stuff that I do to stuff that I'm a total outsider to. Talk about like maybe experiences I've had or things I'm working on, and also like more broadly I want to be able to talk about like things that pertain to the world of being like a creative, or even in some cases just like talk about like pieces of art that I find really inspiring to myself, to share them with you, things that I recommend, just everything. If it pertains to the world of art and creativity, feel free to throw it down as a topic suggestion. I would love to know if anyone made it this far. But yeah, thanks for listening if you did. Hope you have a lovely evening, morning, midday, and I'll catch you in the next one.